My name is Kira Doyle, Captain in the United States Army. At 35, I've commanded logistical operations in some of the most dangerous places in the world. But no battlefield was ever as brutal as my parents' 36th wedding anniversary dinner. The clinking of glasses and the sound of laughter died as my father stood up, his voice cutting through the noise. "We wish your sister was our only child," he said, his eyes locked on mine. The room fell silent. My sister smirked, a triumphant little smile that was sharper than his words. Everyone, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. They just stared. I felt a hot burn in my chest. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a fire ignite inside me, knowing this was the final straw. They thought they were breaking me. They were wrong. Before I tell you my story, I have to ask. If anyone listening to this has ever given everything just to be met with contempt, let me know in the comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe. Because this isn't a story about war, it's a story about liberation. The air inside Jean and Georgetti's was thick with the scent of aged steak and old money. The dark wood-paneled walls seemed to absorb sound, creating an insulated, almost conspiratorial atmosphere. It was the kind of classic Chicago steakhouse where deals were brokered over porterhouses and family dynasties celebrated milestones with expensive bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon. Tonight, it was my parents, Philip and Carol Doyle, and their 36th anniversary. And I, Captain Kira Doyle, was on leave, attempting to navigate a minefield more treacherous than any I'd ever encountered overseas. I was trying, genuinely trying, to connect. The waiter had just cleared our main courses, leaving behind the ghost of garlic and butter. I saw a small opening in the conversation, a brief lull, and I took it. "We just broke ground on the new water filtration system for the village near base," I began, my voice steady. "It's a simple logistical challenge, but it's going to provide clean drinking water for over 3,000 people. The gratitude from the locals, it's..." My words trailed off into nothing. They evaporated like steam in the warm dining room. Because my sister, Nora, chose that exact moment to laugh, a tinkling theatrical sound that drew every eye at the table. She placed her perfectly manicured hand on my uncle's arm. "Oh, speaking of making a splash," she announced, her voice dripping with practiced charm. "We just landed the new campaign for the Viridian luxury watch line. Their tagline is, 'Elegance is timeless.' Isn't that just perfect?" Instantly, the table erupted. Questions flew at her from all directions. "Nora, that's incredible. How did you swing that? Viridian? Their watches are a fortune." My mother, Carol, beamed, her eyes shining with a pride I hadn't seen directed at me since I won a state-level science fair in 10th grade. My father nodded slowly, a deep, satisfied look on his face. My project? The clean water, the 3,000 lives. It was forgotten. I wasn't just ignored, it was as if I had never spoken at all. I was a ghost in my own family's uniform. I took a slow sip of my water, the ice cubes clinking softly against the glass. Acknowledging the situation was the first step. I was invisible. The dessert menus arrived, leather-bound and heavy. As a soldier, I'm conditioned to address problems, to secure the perimeter. Our family's old military surplus store on the outskirts of Chicago was a vulnerability, a constant source of financial strain. With a sense of duty, I made my second attempt of the evening. "I was looking over the store's quarterly numbers," I said, keeping my tone polite and professional. "If we reroute the supply chain for the vintage jackets through the distributor I found in Tennessee, we could increase the profit margin by at least 15%. I didn't even finish the sentence. Nora let out an exaggerated sigh. "Kira, darling," she said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Not everyone wants to talk about logistics at a party. It's so boring." Her word was the signal flare. The ambush was sprung. My uncle Mark chuckled. "Yeah, Kira, leave the business to people who actually know how to run one." A cousin chimed in. "Honestly, who even buys that old army junk anymore?" Each comment was a carefully aimed shot. I felt my defenses solidifying, the emotional armor I'd spent years building sliding into place. I scanned the faces around the table. My mother was smiling faintly, a look of tacit agreement. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, the one who used to bake me cookies and sneak me $5 bills when I was a kid, just looked down at her lap and shook her head slowly, a silent gesture of disappointment. Not at them, at me, as if my very presence, my very nature, was the source of this awkwardness. That was when my father, Philip, pushed his chair back and stood up. The room fell completely silent. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. For a stupid, hopeful split second, I thought he was going to defend me. A flicker of a little girl's hope that her dad would finally step in and say, "Enough." It was a fatal miscalculation. He stood there, a man I barely recognized, his face a mask of cold resentment. He didn't look at the family. He looked directly at me. His eyes were like chips of ice. He raised his glass, not in a toast, but like a judge passing a sentence. "On our 36th anniversary," he began, his voice dangerously low and steady, "Carol and I have been reflecting, and we've come to a realization." He paused, letting the weight of the silence press down on all of us. I held my breath. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "We wish your sister was our only child." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Time didn't just slow down, it shattered. In the fragments of that moment, I saw everything with terrifying clarity. Nora's lips curling into a smug, victorious smile. My mother's quiet, assenting nod. The 23 pairs of eyes, cousins, uncles, aunts, all staring, a mixture of pity, curiosity, and morbid fascination. No one objected. No one looked away in shame. They were all witnesses. And their silence was their consent. A white-hot fire ignited in my chest, burning away the shock, burning away the pain, leaving behind something hard and pure. It was rage, but a cold, disciplined rage. I was no longer Kira, the daughter, the sister, the niece. I was Captain Doyle, compromised and behind enemy lines. My training took over. Mission objective, self-preservation. Acknowledge. The attack was direct, overt, and devastating. Assess. The position is untenable. All surrounding forces are hostile. Staying here means annihilation. Act. Tactical withdrawal is the only option. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my napkin on the table. I stood up, my posture erect, my spine straight. I could feel every eye on me, but I met none of them. My gaze was fixed on the exit sign at the far end of the restaurant. "Happy anniversary," I said. My voice was calm, level, betraying none of the war raging inside me. Then I turned my back on them all and walked away. The whispers started before I had even taken 5 steps, a hiss of static that no longer mattered. I had left the battlefield. The long, exhausting, and undeclared mission of protecting this family, of earning my place in it, was officially over. It was a failure, and it was the most liberating failure of my life. The walk out of Jean and Georgetti's was a blur. The biting Chicago wind felt like a slap in the face, a harsh welcome back to reality. I don't remember the cab ride, only the anonymous sterility of the hotel room near O'Hare Airport. It was a place for people in transit, a space with no past and no future, which felt fitting. The sharp burn in my chest from dinner had subsided, replaced by a hollow, ringing emptiness. I wasn't grieving the family I'd lost tonight. I was beginning to realize I was grieving a family that had never existed in the first place. Sleep was impossible. My mind, trained for after-action reports and threat analysis, refused to shut down. So, I did what I was trained to do. I began my assessment. I pulled my rugged military-grade laptop from my duffel bag and connected the external hard drive, a silver rectangle containing 20 years of digitized family history. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for evidence. Folder by folder, year by year, I clicked through the archives of my own life, and a disturbing pattern began to emerge. It was subtle at first, then undeniable. Christmas, 1998. Nora is front and center, holding up a doll, her smile radiant, capturing all the light in the room. I'm in the background, slightly out of focus, clearing wrapping paper from the floor. Nora's high school graduation, 2008. She's flanked by my beaming parents, her diploma held high like a trophy. I'm on the far edge of the frame, half cut off, my own graduation gown looking plain next to her custom-tailored dress. A family vacation to Disney World. Nora is posing with Cinderella. Nora is laughing on Space Mountain. Nora is hugging Mickey Mouse. I found only one picture of myself from that entire trip. I was holding everyone's coats and bags while they went on a ride. It was all there, in pixelated clarity. In the official, curated history of the Doyle family, Nora was the star. I wasn't a supporting character, I was stage crew. I wasn't a family member, I was support staff. My role was to be useful, to facilitate Nora's spotlight, to be the sensible, responsible one so she could be the brilliant, dazzling one. The realization landed not with a crash, but with a quiet, sickening thud in the pit of my stomach. Then, a darker memory surfaced. It came to me with the chilling clarity of a recently declassified document. For the last 10 years, ever since I made captain, I'd had an automatic transfer set up, $500 every month, sent from my account to my parents to help keep the surplus store afloat. I never mentioned it. It was my duty. You support your unit. That's the code. I remembered a visit home about 3 years ago. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I overheard my mother on the phone in the living room talking to her friend Diane. Her voice was full of manufactured pride. "Oh, the store is finally turning a corner," she'd said. "It's all thanks to Nora, really. She has these brilliant marketing ideas, you know? And she's been supporting us financially, too. She's just so generous with her success." I froze, the coffee pot halfway to my mug. Supporting us financially? Nora had never sent them a dime. Her idea of marketing was posting a selfie in front of the store once a year. My $500 a month, my skipped meals on deployment, my old, worn-out running shoes I never replaced. That money hadn't just been unacknowledged. It had been stolen. The credit for my sacrifice had been transferred to Nora's ledger. My history hadn't just been ignored, it had been actively rewritten, my contribution erased and replaced with her name. My mind, now in full investigative mode, dredged up another piece of evidence. Christmas, when I was 16. I had worked a grueling part-time job at a hardware store all year, saving every dollar I could. My dad had been eyeing a specific model of a Bulova watch for months, talking about it constantly. It was classic, military style, perfect for him. It cost me almost everything I had, but the thought of his face when he opened it kept me going. On Christmas morning, I proudly gave him the box. He opened it, looked at the watch, and gave me a polite, thin smile. "Thank you, Kira. This is very practical." Moments later, Nora presented her gift. A clumsy, abstract painting she'd made in art class, full of messy colors. My dad's face lit up. He held it up for everyone to see. "Now this," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "This is from the heart." He wore the watch once. It's probably still sitting in the back of his sock drawer. But that painting? It was professionally framed and hung in the most prominent spot in the living room, a monument to true affection. Later that day, my mother tried to explain it to me. "Kira, your gift was very thoughtful," she'd said, as if consoling me. "But Nora's gift is about feeling. It's personal." I learned the wrong lesson that day. I learned that my tangible, hard-earned effort was worth less than a shallow, sentimental gesture. I learned that my love, expressed through action and sacrifice, was inferior to a performance of love. In the bottom of a digital shoebox labeled MISC, I found one small file I'd forgotten about. It was a scan of a Christmas card, the only one I'd ever received that wasn't signed by the whole family. It was from my grandfather, Colonel Henry Doyle Sr., sent to my dorm during my first year at West Point. His handwriting was a sharp, disciplined script. It wasn't long, just 2 sentences. "Never let anyone dim your light, Kira. I see it, even when they don't." A single, hot tear finally escaped and traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude for that one voice, that one person who had seen the real me. I closed the photo file. I didn't need to see any more. The evidence was overwhelming. Maya Angelou's words echoed in my mind. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I had been shown who my family was for 35 years. I just hadn't been willing to believe it. This wasn't a series of isolated incidents or misunderstandings. This was a decades-long psychological campaign designed to uphold a specific family doctrine. Nora was the asset. I was the instrument. I shut the laptop. The click was loud and final in the silent hotel room. The hollow ache in my chest was gone. In its place was a core of ice-cold resolve. I finally understood my mission. It wasn't to win their approval or fight for their recognition. My mission was to liberate myself from the enemy. The sun rose over the tarmac at O'Hare, casting long, cold shadows across the runway. Inside Terminal 3, the morning rush was beginning, a river of travelers, each lost in their own world of departures and arrivals. I sat at my gate, my flight back to base scheduled to board in an hour. But I wasn't scrolling through news feeds or checking social media. My phone was in my hand, but it wasn't a tool for distraction. It was a weapon. I remembered something General Ann Dunwoody, the first female four-star general in the U.S. Army, once said in an interview, "Leadership is about solving problems." For years, I had been trying to solve the problem of my family by absorbing the damage, by being better, by giving more. I finally understood. That wasn't leadership. That was enabling. The real problem wasn't my inadequacy. It was their parasitic dependence. And it was time for this leader to solve her biggest problem. My thumb moved with practiced precision across the screen. First objective, cut financial supply lines. I opened my banking app, navigated to bill pay, then automatic transfers. There it was. Doyle Surplus, LLC, $500. A transfer that had executed without fail on the first of every month for the last 120 months. A quiet monument to my loyalty. With 3 steady taps, select, cancel transfer, confirm. A decade of one-sided sacrifice vanished into the digital ether. Each tap felt like a chain link breaking. Second objective, cut intellectual and strategic support. I opened the shared family cloud storage account. There was the folder I'd created, DS Business Development. Inside were years of my work, done in my spare time, on weekends, during long nights on deployment, spreadsheets forecasting sales, contact lists for new suppliers, a comprehensive logistics plan to modernize their inventory system. I selected the entire folder. My thumb hovered over the trash can icon. There was no hesitation. Delete. Confirm delete permanently. The information was gone. The crutch was kicked out from under them. The final step was communication. A good commander informs their troops of a change in mission. I opened our family group chat, a space usually filled with Nora's selfies and my mother's inspirational quotes. I ignored the unread messages from last night. I didn't engage in emotion. I didn't offer explanations. I issued a field report. My thumbs typed out the message in a crisp, military format. Notice. Effective 0800 hours today, all financial and consultative support for Doyle's Surplus is terminated. Over and out. I hit send. Then, without reading any replies, I went into the group settings and muted all notifications. Permanently. I knew a storm was coming, but by the time it made landfall, I'd be at 30,000 feet, flying high above the turbulence. The flight was smooth. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't spend the time worrying about my family. I didn't draft emails or crunch numbers for their store. I read a book. I watched the clouds drift by. I felt light. When I landed and switched my phone off airplane mode, the predictable chaos erupted. A barrage of notifications flooded my screen. 19 missed calls, 37 text messages. I let them sit for a moment, observing the enemy's frantic response from a safe distance. I opened my voicemail first. My father's voice was a low growl, distorted by rage. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? You call me back right now, Kira. You hear me? Right now." Delete. Next, a tearful pleading message from my mother. "Kira, honey, please, what have we done? You have to understand, your father was just upset. This store is everything we have. How could you be so selfish? You're destroying this family. The classic guilt trip maneuver, predictable, delete. Then I opened the text messages. Most were variations of the same panicked pleas from aunts and cousins. But then I saw the one from Nora. It wasn't pleading. It was a declaration of war. Think you're so tough, Captain? Playing the victim and running away. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I'm going to make sure everyone sees you for the cold, heartless monster you really are. I read the message twice. A cold chill, different from the Chicago wind, crept over me. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. Nora was threatening my reputation, the very foundation of my career and my identity. This was an escalation. Later that evening, I sat on the edge of my bed in my Spartan, orderly room on base. The crisp hospital corners of my perfectly made bed, the neatly arranged books on my shelf, the polished boots on the floor. It was a world of logic and order, a sanctuary from the emotional chaos I'd left behind. The frantic buzzing of my phone had finally stopped. The silence was profound. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. It was the calm after a necessary amputation. The limb was diseased, and I had finally found the courage to cut it off to save the rest of me. I had taken the first step. I had established a boundary. I knew this war wasn't over. Nora's text was proof of that, but as I looked at my own reflection in the darkened window, I didn't see a rejected daughter. I saw an officer who had successfully completed the first phase of a critical mission. I felt a surge of strength, a feeling of rightness that settled deep in my bones. And I have to stop and ask you, the listener, if you've ever had that moment where you finally said, no more, and drew a line in the sand. If you know that feeling of terrifying, beautiful peace that comes right after, support this mission by hitting that like button. And in the comments, just type one word, boundary. Because that one word is where all our power begins. The battle was far from won. But for the first time, I was fighting for the right objective, myself. The days following what I now called the Chicago incident were quiet, too quiet. I threw myself into my work, coordinating supply shipments and managing personnel with a relentless focus. I was building walls, brick by emotional brick, creating a fortress of professional competence where no one could touch me. But Nora's threatening text message lingered in the back of my mind, a dormant threat waiting to activate. I was on high alert, isolated in my own self-imposed command center. The first crack in my fortress came from Lieutenant Kathleen Riley. Kat. We'd been through officer candidate school together, and she knew me better than almost anyone. She was sharp, funny, and had a radar for emotional bullshit that could detect a lie from a mile away. She'd noticed the change in me, the clipped responses in meetings, the extra hours I was putting in at the office. But she didn't push. She observed. One afternoon, after a grueling 3-hour field training exercise under the blistering sun, I was sitting alone on the tailgate of a Humvee, staring into the distance. My muscles ached, but the exhaustion in my soul was deeper. Kat walked over, her face smudged with dirt and sweat. She didn't say a word. She just opened 2 ice-cold bottles of water, handed one to me, and sat down beside me. We sat in silence for a full minute, the only sound being the distant pop, pop, pop of a firing range. Whatever battle you just fought back home, she said finally, her voice low and even. It looks like it was rougher than this. She took a long drink of water. I don't need the details, Kira. I just need you to know, I've got your 6. I've got your 6. In the civilian world, it means I've got your back. In the military, it's a sacred vow. It means I will cover the most vulnerable angle. I will stand between you and whatever is coming. It was a simple sentence, but it pierced through my armor like a high-velocity round. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear it until I did. I gave her a small, grateful nod, unable to speak past the lump forming in my throat. For the first time in days, I felt a single brick loosen in the wall around me. That night, a small, unexpected package was waiting for me on my bunk. Inside was a Tupperware container filled with homemade chocolate chip cookies, the gooey, barely held together kind, and a short, handwritten note on official Army stationery. Mental Logistics, it read. Signed, a concerned subordinate, P.S. My mom's recipe. Don't tell anyone. It was from Kat. It was the most effective supply drop I'd ever received. The second ally appeared in the most unlikely of places, a project planning meeting. Brian Vance was a civilian engineer, a brilliant guy with kind eyes and a laugh that was a little too loud for a conference room. He was contracted to help us overhaul the base's power grid. He knew nothing about military protocol, which I found refreshing. He just saw people. One day, a critical shipment of transformers was mistakenly rerouted to the wrong coast. It was a logistical nightmare that could have delayed our project by months. Panic was brewing. I spent 20 minutes on the phone, calm and methodical, speaking a language of shipping manifests, carrier codes, and rerouting protocols. I cross-referenced 3 different systems, found a U.S. Air Force transport plane with available cargo space leaving from a nearby base, and got our shipment re-manifested and airborne in under an hour. After the call, I looked up to see Brian staring at me from across the room, a look of genuine awe on his face. "That was incredible," he said, shaking his head slightly. "The way you just handled that. It was like watching a conductor lead an orchestra through a storm. All these chaotic parts, and you just made them work." His compliment landed squarely on the part of me my family had always dismissed as boring. He saw my skills not as a quirky character flaw, but as a talent. He saw the music in my logistics. It was a simple observation from an outsider, but it validated my worth in a way my own family never had. The final reinforcement came from my true commander-in-chief, my grandfather. I scheduled a video call with him in Florida, intending it to be a quick wellness check. But Colonel Henry Doyle Sr. could read a situation report in a person's eyes. "You look tired, Captain," he said, his voice a familiar, comforting gravel over the laptop speakers. "And not the good kind of tired after a day's hard work. This is different." I tried to brush it off, but he held up a hand. "Kira," he said, his tone shifting from grandfather to colonel. "Listen to me. A soldier's first duty is to the mission. But sometimes the most important mission is protecting your own flank. You don't fight to the last man for a piece of ground that has no strategic value. You don't sacrifice yourself for a losing cause." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes locking with mine. He gave me permission. Permission to stop fighting a war I was never meant to win. Kat's loyalty, Brian's admiration, my grandfather's wisdom. They were building a new kind of fortress around me, not of walls, but of support. And it was just in time, because the enemy was about to launch a new offensive. That evening, Kat sent me a text. "You need to see this." It was a link to Nora's Facebook page. My sister had written a long, beautifully tragic post. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. She wrote about the quiet heartbreak of families torn apart by careers that demand a certain kind of coldness. She spun a vague but compelling tale about a family member struggling with the emotional toll of their service, who had suddenly and cruelly cut off their loving family during a time of need. She hinted at PTSD. She talked about praying for their healing. It was brilliant, it was vicious, and it was working. The comments section was a flood of sympathy. "Oh, Nora, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Sending prayers to your family. It's so sad when our heroes lose their way." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Nora hadn't just declared war. She had taken the battlefield public. She was using my uniform, my service, my very identity as a weapon against me. The warmth I had felt from my new allies was still there, but now it was fueling a different kind of fire. Silence was no longer a strategy. It was surrender. I needed a counter-offensive. Nora's first Facebook post was just the opening salvo. I had foolishly hoped it would end there, a single, venomous outburst. I was wrong. My sister, the PR director, was launching a full-scale psychological warfare campaign, and I was target number 1. The posts that followed were insidious, a slow drip of disinformation designed to poison any goodwill I'd ever earned. A few days after the first post, a picture appeared. It was an old family photo from a Thanksgiving years ago. Everyone was smiling, gathered around a perfectly roasted turkey. The caption read, Throwback to when we were all whole. Cherish these moments, you never know when they'll be your last. Family over everything. It was just vague enough to be deniable, but its meaning was crystal clear. Then came the articles. Nora started sharing links from reputable sources, Psychology Today, the Veterans Affairs website, about the hidden struggles of military personnel. The invisible wounds, understanding PTSD in our veterans. How service can create emotional distance. She would add a simple, heartfelt comment like, "So important to support our troops, not just on the battlefield, but when they come home too." She was building a narrative, brick by insidious brick. Kira isn't cruel, she's damaged. She isn't a monster, she's a victim of her own profession. It was a strategy designed to make her look compassionate while painting me as unstable and mentally compromised. The poison began to seep into the soil of my life. The comments section on her posts became a public tribunal where I was being tried in absentia. Old family friends, people who had known me since I was a child, chimed in. "My heart breaks for the Doyle family," one wrote. Another added, "Poor Nora, having to be the strong one and carry it all." I was no longer Kira Doyle. I was a cautionary tale, a faceless soldier who had lost her humanity somewhere overseas. My uniform, the symbol of my dedication and honor, was being twisted into a shroud. My service, the thing I was most proud of, was being used as evidence of my brokenness. Every scroll of the screen felt like a fresh insult, a new layer of dirt being shoveled onto my name. Then, the attack escalated from the digital world to the real one. My phone rang one afternoon. It was a number from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years, my father's cousin, Linda. I answered, expecting a cautious, fact-finding inquiry. Instead, I was met with a torrent of accusations. "I can't believe you, Kira," she started, her voice shaking with self-righteous anger. "After everything your parents have done for you, to just abandon them, to abandon Nora when she's clearly trying so hard to hold everything together, that uniform has turned you into an ungrateful, heartless monster." I stood there, speechless, listening to this woman who knew nothing about the truth past judgment on me. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I just said, "Thank you for your call, Linda," and hung up. That night, I learned that my parents had become active combatants in Nora's war. They weren't posting online. It wasn't their style. Their method was more traditional, more intimate. They were on the phone, calling every relative and family friend in their address book. They weren't angry. They were heartbroken. They painted a tragic picture of a daughter who, poisoned by her success and a cold military career, had turned her back on the family that loved her. They were perfecting the art of playing the victim. The pressure began to mount. As an officer, integrity is everything. Your reputation is your currency. Even a baseless accusation can leave a permanent stain. I felt the walls closing in, the weight of their collective narrative pressing down on me. I was being buried alive under an avalanche of lies. That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't visit. I paced the floor of my small room, the path from my bed to my window becoming a well-worn track of anxiety. My mind raced through counteroffensives. I could fight fire with fire. I could post my own story. I could upload screenshots of the bank transfers, expose every lie, detail every injustice. But the moment I imagined doing it, a wave of disgust washed over me. That was Nora's game. A messy public war of words, played out for an audience of strangers. It was a battle fought in the mud, and even if I won, I'd still be covered in it. Sun Tzu's words from The Art of War, a book we studied religiously at West Point, echoed in my head. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. I knew Nora. Her entire existence was fueled by public perception and drama. The social media battlefield was her home turf. Fighting her there would be playing right into her hands. But I also knew myself. I'm a strategist. I'm disciplined. My strength lies in logic, in facts, in executing a plan with precision. I wouldn't engage in her skirmish. I would redefine the entire theater of war. I needed to bypass her front lines and strike directly at the enemy's command and control center. I needed an action so decisive, so irrefutable, that it would render her entire social media campaign irrelevant. I needed a weapon with more firepower than a Facebook post. I stopped pacing. A sudden, chilling calm settled over me. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady. I didn't open Facebook. I didn't open my text messages. I opened a flight booking app. My thumbs moved quickly. Departure. Fayetteville, NC. Arrival, Tampa, Florida. The mission parameters were clear. It was time to report to my commanding officer. It was time to present the facts to Colonel Henry Doyle. I was in the back of an Uber, heading towards the airport, watching the gray landscape of Fayetteville blur past my window. My duffel bag was on the seat beside me. My flight confirmation was on my phone. My objective was clear. I was focused, running through the talking points for my meeting with my grandfather like a pre-mission brief. That's when my phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion into my strategic calm. It wasn't a text. It was an incoming group video call. The screen showed 3 names: Mom, Dad, Nora. My first instinct, the old instinct, was to decline, to avoid. But a memory surfaced, the voice of a drill sergeant from my basic training days. When you're in an ambush, you don't stand still. You don't hide, you move, you counterattack, and you create your own exit. This was an ambush, and I was done hiding. I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and pressed the green button. Their faces flickered onto my screen, a miserable triptych of anger and exhaustion. They looked like they'd been up all night, plotting. They thought their smear campaign, their coordinated phone calls, had been enough to soften the target. They thought I was calling to surrender. My mother started, her voice a practiced, theatrical sob. Kira? Oh, thank God. Kira, how could you do this to us, to this family? Everyone is saying such terrible things about us. I didn't let her seize the narrative. I didn't let her play the victim. I launched my counterattack immediately, my voice as cold and hard as polished steel. Terrible things? I asked, my eyes fixed on her through the small screen. Let's define terrible things, shall we? Would that include a father announcing to a room full of people that he wishes his own daughter had never been born? My father flinched, his eyes widening in shock. I didn't stop. My gaze shifted to my mother. Or perhaps a mother who stands by and silently agrees with him. Her fake tears stopped instantly. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Or maybe, I continued, my eyes finally locking on Nora, a sister who systematically steals the credit for her older sister's financial sacrifices to make herself look good. Are those the kind of terrible things you mean, Mom? Silence. A thick, stunned silence filled the car. For the first time in their lives, they were being confronted with the unvarnished, ugly truth of their own actions. There was no emotional camouflage to hide behind, no room to deflect or deny. I had just laid the facts out on the table, like crime scene photos. Nora recovered first, her default defense mechanism kicking in. She sneered, her face twisting with rage. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. I almost laughed. The accusation was so predictable, so pathetically small. I looked straight at her, my voice dropping to a low, analytical tone, as if I were evaluating a failed piece of equipment. Jealous? You know, I think I used to be. I was jealous of the attention you got so easily. But I'm not anymore. Because I've seen the price of that attention, it's turned you into a liar. A manipulative, shallow fraud. Your entire identity is built on what other people think of you. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I addressed all 3 of them. Let me be perfectly clear. I don't need your approval. I don't need your money. And I certainly don't need your twisted version of love anymore. I leaned closer to the phone, ensuring they could see the absolute conviction in my eyes. Effective immediately, my life is a no-fly zone. You are permanently denied entry. The explosion I expected came from my father. His face turned purple with rage, his voice a guttural roar that crackled through the phone's tiny speaker. You dare talk to me like that? You ungrateful brat. You are no longer a part of this family. Do you hear me? You are out. And then, the most amazing thing happened. As he spat out the words that were meant to be my ultimate punishment, the final rejection, I felt a smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smirk. It wasn't a bitter grin. It was a genuine smile of pure, unadulterated relief. The heaviest burden I had ever carried had just been lifted from my shoulders by the very people who had placed it there. "Thank you, Dad," I said, and my voice was light, free. "That is precisely my objective." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a final word. My thumb moved to the red button on the screen, and I ended the call. The silence that followed was the most profound I had ever known. It was the silence of a battlefield after the war has finally ended. One by one, I completed the mission. Open contacts, find Dad. Block number, find Mom. Block number, find Nora. Block number. Open group chat, leave conversation, delete conversation. The psychological battlefield was cleared. The enemy's lines of communication were severed. The mission was complete. I leaned my head back against the seat and looked out the window. The sky was a brilliant, clear blue. I was moving forward. It was the hardest conversation of my life, but it was also the moment I truly got my life back. And I want to know if this resonates with you, if you have ever had to have that one final liberating conversation, or if you're still waiting for the courage to have it. Show your support for this act of liberation by hitting the like button. In the comments below, just write 2 words: no-fly zone. Let's create a community that understands the power of that declaration. Now, it was time to report to my high command. Flying south from North Carolina to Florida felt like crossing into a different country. I left behind the gray skies and entered a world saturated with color: the impossibly blue sky, the vibrant green of the palm trees. When I drove my rental car into the villages, the sheer scale of the retirement community was astounding. It was a sprawling, immaculate world of golf courses, town squares, and perfectly manicured lawns. But my grandfather's house was my true destination. It was more than a home. It was a fortress of honor. From the outside, it was a modest, clean-lined villa like any other. But the moment I stepped inside, I was in his world. The air was different here, calm, orderly, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old books. There was no clutter. Every object had a purpose. On the wall of his study, meticulously arranged in glass cases, were the artifacts of a life of service: medals, commendation ribbons, a folded American flag from a command post in Germany, photographs of him with generals whose names I'd only read in history books. This was the legacy my father had turned his back on, the legacy I'd always strived to live up to. Colonel Henry Doyle Sr. was 80 years old, but he stood as straight as any 20-year-old private. He greeted me at the door not with frail arms, but with a solid, enveloping hug that spoke of strength, not sentimentality. He pulled back, his clear blue eyes scanning my face, taking in the fatigue and the stress I couldn't hide. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Situation report, Captain," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. It wasn't a question. It was an order. We sat in his study, in 2 matching leather armchairs. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embellish. As he had commanded, I gave my report. I laid out the events of the past week with the clinical precision of an after-action review. I presented the facts, systematically and chronologically. The inciting incident occurred at my parents' 36th anniversary dinner. I began. I recounted the conversation, the insults, and my father's final, brutal statement. I then detailed the subsequent psychological campaign launched by my sister, Nora. I opened my laptop and presented the evidence. Exhibit A: screenshots of Nora's Facebook posts, the carefully crafted narrative of my supposed mental instability. Exhibit B: scanned bank statements from the last 12 months, showing the recurring $500 transfer to Doyle's Surplus, LLC. Exhibit C: a transcript of the final video call, which I had written down from memory in the Uber, detailing my declaration of a no-fly zone. I presented the intelligence without emotion. My voice never wavered. I trusted the facts to carry the necessary weight. Throughout my entire report, my grandfather sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his knees. He listened with an intensity that was more intimidating than any interrogation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask a single question. His face, etched with the lines of 100 battles, slowly hardened into a mask of cold, controlled fury. The silence in the room when I finished was absolute. It was heavier than any shout, deeper than any scream. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he lifted his right hand and brought it down on the solid oak arm of his chair. It wasn't a loud bang, but a single, sharp rap that cracked the silence like a gunshot. It was the only outward sign of the storm raging within him. "This is not a family dispute," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is a breach of honor." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not just love in his eyes, but a profound, soldier-to-soldier respect. "They have disgraced the Doyle name. They have dishonored the uniform I wore, the uniform you now wear. They have acted without integrity, without loyalty, without courage." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "You did the right thing, Kira. You held your ground, and when the position became indefensible, you secured your flank. You acted as a commander should." His words were a validation so complete, so absolute, that I felt a decade of self-doubt begin to dissolve. He didn't just believe me. He understood the principles upon which I had acted. There was no deliberation. His decision was instant and absolute, forged in a lifetime of command. "Insubordination and contemptible conduct demand consequences," he stated, as if issuing a court-martial verdict. "Order will be restored." He stood up, his movements economical and precise. He walked over to a display case on the far wall. From a velvet-lined box, he carefully removed a medal, a 5-pointed star suspended from a red, white, and blue ribbon. My breath caught in my throat. It was his Silver Star, awarded for gallantry in action decades ago. He walked back to me and stood before my chair. He didn't pin it on me. He pressed it firmly into the palm of my hand, his warm, dry fingers closing my own around it. "Valor is not confined to the battlefield," he said, his voice thick with a rare emotion. "You've been fighting a war alone for years, on a front no one could see. You earned this more than I ever did." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. This was a moment of honor, not pity. Then, with the medal still warm in my hand, he turned and walked to the antique rotary phone on his desk. He moved with a renewed sense of purpose, a general preparing for his final campaign. He picked up the heavy receiver and dialed a number from memory. He waited a moment. "David," he said into the phone, his voice now stripped of all emotion, replaced by pure command. "It's Henry Doyle. I need you at my house, immediately." He paused, listening. "Yes, it's important. We have a new strategic objective. We need to update the operational plan. And we need to rewrite my entire last will and testament." Less than 2 hours after my grandfather made the call, a sleek black Lincoln Town car pulled into his driveway. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out. This was David Martin, my grandfather's attorney for over 40 years. He was a man whose calm demeanor concealed a mind as sharp as a bayonet. He shook my hand, his grip firm, and his eyes held a look not of pity, but of profound understanding. He already knew this wasn't a social call. My grandfather convened the meeting in his study. The three of us sat around his large mahogany desk, the room filled with the quiet dignity of military history. It didn't feel like a legal meeting. It felt like a council of war. I was technically a witness, but I felt like I was watching a force of nature about to be unleashed. My grandfather, the colonel, did not waste time on preamble. He got straight to the point, his voice ringing with the clarity of a bugle call. "David," he began, "I am invoking the full revocable terms of my living trust. I want to make immediate and significant changes to my last will and testament." David simply nodded, opened his briefcase, and took out a legal pad. "I'm listening, Henry." "First," my grandfather declared, his voice cold and devoid of any sentiment, "I want the following names struck from the document entirely. Remove my son, Philip Doyle. Remove my daughter-in-law, Carol Doyle. And remove my granddaughter, Nora Doyle." They are to be disinherited completely and irrevocably. I gasped. A quiet, involuntary intake of breath. I knew he was angry, but I had never imagined this. The sheer, absolute finality of his words hung in the air. This wasn't just a punishment, it was an erasure. David's pen scratched across the paper. He didn't even blink. Understood. The primary beneficiaries are removed. Who is the new sole beneficiary? My grandfather turned his gaze to me. My entire estate, all assets, real estate properties, investment portfolios, and the contents of the Doyle Family Trust Fund, is to be transferred upon my death to my granddaughter, Captain Kira Doyle. The room seemed to tilt. The words didn't make sense. Estate? Trust fund? I had always assumed my grandfather was comfortable, but I had no idea of the scale. My head was spinning. This wasn't what I had come here for. I opened my mouth to protest, to say that I didn't want or need his money, but he raised a single finger, silencing me. With one binding condition, he continued, looking back at his lawyer. A significant portion of the estate's liquid assets will be used to establish a new charitable foundation. It will be named the Eleanor Doyle Valor Fund, in honor of my late wife. Eleanor, my grandmother. A kind, strong woman who had passed away when I was a child. David looked up from his notes. And the fund's mission? My grandfather's eyes gleamed with a strategic brilliance that sent a shiver down my spine. Its mission will be to provide scholarships and business grants to female military veterans. It will be managed by a board of directors with Captain Kira Doyle appointed as its first lifetime chairperson. I finally understood. This wasn't about rewarding me with money. It was about redefining a legacy. He was taking the Doyle family name, which my father and sister had tarnished with their selfishness and greed, and forging it into something new, a symbol of service, honor, and valor. He was entrusting that legacy, the true Doyle legacy, to me. He wasn't just giving me his wealth, he was giving me his purpose. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. But for the first time in my life, they weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming, crushing gratitude. David Martin, ever the professional, drafted the codicil, the legal amendment, to the will right there on his laptop. He read it aloud, the legal jargon a stark, powerful poem of dispossession and transference. Two of my grandfather's neighbors, both fellow veterans, were called in to act as official witnesses. I watched as my grandfather signed the document, his signature a bold, unwavering script. Then, the witnesses signed. Finally, David affixed his notary seal with a firm, satisfying thud. It was done. The entire dynastic and financial structure of my family had been dismantled and rebuilt in under an hour. After the witnesses and David had left, my grandfather stood by the window, looking out at the setting Florida sun. General Patton had a saying, he said quietly. A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan next week. He turned to me, a sly, tactical glint in his eye. Now for the execution. A victory is meaningless if the enemy doesn't know they've been defeated. He walked to his phone, but he didn't call my father. He dialed the number of a distant cousin in Chicago, a woman known throughout the family for her inability to keep a secret. He put the call on speakerphone. Hello, Margaret. It's your cousin Henry down in Florida, he began, his voice warm and folksy. He made small talk for a minute, asking about her children, her health. Then he delivered the payload. Listen, the reason I'm calling, he said, injecting a note of feigned reluctance into his voice, is that my lawyer was just here and we've made some rather significant changes to my will. I've decided to make my granddaughter Kira my sole heir and the head of a new veterans charity I'm setting up. I know this might cause a bit of a stir with Philip's side of the family, so I thought it was only right you hear it from me first. He let the information hang in the air, a perfectly deployed piece of ordnance. I could almost hear Margaret's mind racing, her gossip-loving heart beating faster. She stammered something about being shocked, but understanding. Thank you, Margaret, my grandfather said smoothly. I knew I could count on you to be discreet. He hung up the phone and looked at me, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. Operation Thunderbolt is a go, he announced. The bomb has been dropped. Now, we wait for the shockwave to hit Chicago. My grandfather and I didn't have to wait long for the shockwave. The news of the revised will, delivered so strategically by Cousin Margaret, ripped through the family grapevine like a wildfire. I didn't seek out the information. It found me. It came not as a direct assault, but as scattered pieces of intelligence from neutral territories, a text from a well-meaning cousin, an email from an old family friend. From my quiet outpost in Florida, I watched the fallout in Chicago unfold like a battle damage assessment report. The first casualty was the store. Doyle's surplus. It had been the crumbling symbol of my family's pride for 2 generations. As it turned out, its foundation wasn't built on nostalgia. It was built on credit. The store's suppliers and the bank holding its business loan had been patient for years, operating under the quiet assumption of my grandfather's eventual and substantial inheritance. The moment the word got out that Philip Doyle was no longer the heir, that patience evaporated. The creditors called in their debts, all at once. Without my monthly financial support, without my logistical plans, and without the safety net of my grandfather's fortune, my parents were exposed. They couldn't pay. The store that had been their whole world was seized, its contents inventoried, and a for sale sign was hammered into the dusty front lawn. The legacy they valued above their own daughter had been liquidated to cover the costs of their poor judgment. It had all turned to smoke. The second casualty was Nora. Her entire career, her entire social standing, was built on a carefully constructed facade of effortless success and familial devotion. When the true story came out, not from me, but from the furious, gossiping network of our own family, that facade shattered. Relatives who had offered her sympathy on Facebook now understood the context. They knew about the 10 years of my secret financial support. They knew about the dinner. They knew she had lied, that she had stolen my sacrifice and worn it as her own achievement. The narrative she had so expertly crafted online collapsed. The comments of sympathy dried up, replaced by a telling silence. She was no longer the tragic heroine, she was a pariah. A few of her key clients in the PR world, businesses that lived and died by their public image, quietly terminated their contracts. You can't sell authenticity when you have none of your own. The currency she valued most, the admiration of others, had been devalued to nothing. I received one final communication from each of them. A week after the news broke, an email from Nora appeared in my inbox. My finger hovered over the delete button, but I decided to open it. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It was, in its own way, far more pathetic. Kira, it began, I know things are complicated, but you have everything now. Grandpa's money, his approval, it's more than anyone needs. Can't you just share a little of it to help us get back on our feet? We're still family, after all. I read the words, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a profound sense of distance. She still didn't get it. She never would. She thought the issue was about the distribution of money, not the bankruptcy of her character. We're still family. The phrase, once a source of obligation and pain, was now utterly meaningless. I pressed delete. A few days later, a voicemail arrived from an unknown number. I listened. It was my mother. Her voice was raw, stripped of all its performative drama, leaving only a desperate, ragged panic. She was sobbing. Kira, it's me. They're taking the house. The store is gone. Philip, your father. He doesn't get out of bed. Everyone is looking at us, saying we're failures. We were wrong, Kira. We were so wrong. Please, please come home. Please just help us. Save us. Save us. The 2 words that had defined my role in the family for 35 years. For a moment, a ghost of the old obligation stirred within me, but it was just a phantom. I listened to the message to the end, then calmly deleted it. It wasn't an act of hatred. It was an act of survival. My role as the family savior was a position I had been honorably discharged from. To go back would be to willingly re-enlist in my own destruction. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't mean reconciliation. It meant releasing myself from the burden of their future. That evening, I was back on base. I sat by the window in my room, looking out at the disciplined lines of the barracks and the distant figures of soldiers running drills on the parade ground. Order, structure, purpose. I didn't feel the triumphant joy of a victor. I didn't feel the bitter satisfaction of revenge. I felt a vast, quiet emptiness. I had won. But winning a war always comes at a cost. The cost for me was the final, flickering ember of an illusion. The illusion that I had a family to go back to. My grandfather was my family, yes, but the core unit I had spent my life trying to belong to was now just a crater, a wasteland of their own making. I remembered a verse from Psalms my grandfather liked to quote, from a small Bible he kept on his desk. For the wicked shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. I finally understood it. It wasn't a promise of heavenly reward. It was a statement of natural consequences. Their world, built on a foundation of lies and entitlement, had collapsed under its own weight. My world, built on discipline and service, remained. From the ashes of that illusion, I saw something new taking shape. It was a chance not to fix what was broken, but to build something entirely new. Something real. Something that would last. Something worthy of the name Doyle. 1 year later. The woman standing at the podium is not the same one who walked out of a Chicago steakhouse into the cold night. On the outside, the uniform is similar, but the oak leaf insignia on my collar is new. I am Major Kira Doyle now. But the real change is on the inside. The hollow ache in my chest has been replaced by a quiet, steady warmth. The hyper-vigilance of a soldier in enemy territory has softened into the calm confidence of a commander in her own command. I'm standing in a small, sunlit auditorium at a community college, a place of second chances and new beginnings. I didn't use my grandfather's inheritance to buy a mansion or a sports car. I used it to fulfill his final command. I used it to build. Welcome to the inaugural awards ceremony for the Eleanor Doyle Valor Fund. My mission statement, once a desperate whisper in a lonely hotel room, had become my life's work. My mission is no longer to survive. It's to build. Today, we were laying the first foundation stone, awarding full academic scholarships to female veterans transitioning back into civilian life. I looked out at the small crowd, and I didn't feel a single shred of the old anxiety I used to associate with public attention. Because in the front row, I saw my family. My real family. There was my grandfather, Colonel Henry Doyle Sr., his back ramrod straight, his eyes gleaming with a pride so fierce it felt like a physical force. Beside him was Kat, my best friend, my comrade in arms, who had flown in on a weekend pass just to be here. She gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The soldier's sign for solid copy. You've got this. And next to her was Brian. Over the past year, his quiet admiration had blossomed into a steady, supportive love that I had never believed was possible. He didn't try to change me or diminish my strengths. He celebrated them. He was here today, not in the spotlight, but standing quietly in the back of the room, just watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated pride. His silent presence was the firmest ground I had ever stood on. They were my unit, the people who had my six. They weren't bound to me by blood, but by something far stronger: loyalty, respect, and unconditional love. The very things I had once searched for in all the wrong places. I cleared my throat and approached the microphone. Good afternoon, I began, my voice clear and steady. My grandmother, Eleanor Doyle, believed that the greatest acts of service often happen far from any battlefield. She believed in the quiet courage it takes to rebuild, to learn, and to create a new life. It is in her honor that we award our first scholarship today. I held up the certificate. The first recipient of the Eleanor Doyle Valor Fund Scholarship is former Sergeant Eva Torres. A young woman with dark, intelligent eyes and a posture that still held the discipline of her service stood up from the second row. There was a smattering of applause as she walked toward the stage. As she approached, I saw a flicker of something familiar in her eyes. a potent combination of fierce determination, boundless ambition, and a sliver of uncertainty. I saw myself, all those years ago, a young woman desperate to prove her worth in a world that wasn't sure what to do with her. I handed her the oversized ceremonial check, and we posed for a picture. But as the camera flashed, I leaned in closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Listen to me, Sergeant," I said, my voice firm but warm. "There will be people who will try to tell you that you are not smart enough, not strong enough, not good enough. They will try to dim your light." I held her gaze, pouring every ounce of my own hard-won conviction into my words. "Never let them. Your new mission is to build the future you deserve." She looked at me, a flash of sudden, profound understanding in her eyes. She nodded, her handshake firming with a new resolve. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. "Hoo-ah." As she walked off the stage, I knew I hadn't just given her a scholarship. I had given her the validation I had needed so desperately myself. I had passed on the torch that my grandfather had so carefully guarded for me. The circle was complete. The ceremony concluded a few minutes later. As the attendees began to mingle, I remained on the stage, looking out at the three people who mattered most: my grandfather, my best friend, the man I loved, my chosen family. The war was over. The mission of liberation was complete. I was no longer a soldier fighting for survival in a toxic family dynamic. I was the commander of my own life. I was a builder, an architect of a new legacy. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the large auditorium window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sparks. The light fell across my face, warm and bright. It wasn't the fading glow of a sunset on a finished battle. It was the clear, brilliant light of a new dawn. And my legacy was just beginning. That sunlight on my face wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. My mission shifted from surviving to building, and that is the greatest liberation of all. For everyone listening who is still in the trenches of your own quiet war, please know that you are seen, and you are not alone. If this story gave you a piece of strength to start building your own new dawn, please support our mission here by subscribing and liking this video. And in the comments, I'd be honored if you would share just one thing you are looking forward to building in your own life.